What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another episode of Lions Latest, kind of going through the latest Detroit Lions news. That's right. This isn't really a news updated type of video. Instead, it's just discussing another potential trade idea. But I want to make a short little video on this, mainly to kind of get the soundbite of Dan Campbell and his little smile that, hey, something could go down.
You don't feel there's anything imminent on the trade front, like in the next 24 hours, nothing that Brad's come to you with?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, could be.
What did you think of Muhammad yesterday?
No, seriously, though, has he come to you with something that you...
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah, an edge rusher might be on the way. It may not, but it might be on the way. He didn't really tell us for sure that they're going to make a move, but I do anticipate the Lions are going to make a trade, and it sounds like it could be happening soon for the Lions. I don't think the Lions are super desperate right now because since Hutchinson's went down, they continue to find ways to win. I think they're going to make a move, but I don't think that they're in a rush to make that move. They just have to find the right guy, and then I think when you get to all of the contract situations that go into it as well, that can be the thing that gets forgotten a little bit, is the juggling of the cap situations with teams moving off guys. That could have a lot to do with it. And the player that we're going to talk about today, that could have a lot to do with his situation. But also, our teams kind of officially selling on the season. Have teams made that decision like, hey, we're done. We're not going anywhere this season. And also, has the price gotten a little bit lower because the Lions haven't showed like, hey, we're desperate. We need somebody. We're winning without Aiden Hutchinson at this point. So I do think a move is going to go down. And I don't know that the player that we're going to talk about today is even on the table for the Lions. But I think it's an interesting discussion. I saw it brought up specifically for the Chicago Bears within the last week. And I was like, hey, we talked a little bit about Cameron Jordan over here. I brought up Peyton Turner. I thought that would be an interesting addition to former first-round pick. However, the guy that you guys were bringing up in the chat last time me and Easy were live was Carl Granderson. And I was like, let me dive a little bit into this Carl Granderson idea and just try to make sense of it if it's a real possibility. Over the last week, Pro Football Focus put out an article of fairy tale trades, and they had Carl Granderson being traded to the Chicago Bears. Now, they didn't give a compensation estimate. I've seen it estimated as a player and a third-round pick, something along those lines. We'll get to that here a little bit later in the video. But it was thrown out as an idea. And the more I think about the Lions situation, just want to kind of keep this as a potential idea out there because I think it could make some sense. I think there's real pros to making a move like this. Know that Carl Granderson signed an extension with the New Orleans Saints before the season. He signed a 4-year contract extension. It's 4 years, $52 million, about for $13 million per season, with like $33 million guaranteed at the time. And then before the beginning of this season, in February of 2024, I believe it was, Carl Granderson's contract was restructured. They don't really have any money. That's the problem that they're dealing with right now. They restructured a lot of guys coming into this year, and he was one of those players. Now, it saved them just over $7 million in cap space for this season, but it just pushed more money into future seasons toward the cap hit because they essentially took a roster bonus, turned it into a signing bonus so that they could spread it out through the rest of his contract, so they just pushed more money backward. Now, this wouldn't be a move necessarily to help the Saints right now, but again, they're coming off another loss to the LA Chargers. Derek Carr down at this point, and the connection that the Lions have with Carl Granderson, as well as a lot of those New Orleans Saints players, going back to 2019 as an undrafted free agent out of Wyoming that has overlap when Dan Campbell was there and also when Aaron Glenn was there with the New Orleans Saints. A player like that the Lions would potentially be bringing in here is someone that they would have to feel like, okay, we like this guy. I believe we like this guy for multiple seasons. This isn't like a rental. We're probably giving up a little bit more in terms of draft capital to get a guy that's been incredibly productive for the New Orleans Saints, as well as very consistent on the field. 15 games in 2020, 15 games in 2021, 16 games in 2022, 2023. He played in 17 games. This season, he's played in 8, and he started all 8 games. He's become a full-time starter for that team as they've kind of like phased out Cameron Jordan a little bit with Chase Young. Isaiah Foskey's not really seeing snaps. And because they're a bad team right now and they just don't really have any money, it could make sense that the New Orleans Saints are like, dude, we got to open up cap space somehow. If you look at their next year's cap situation, there's not a lot of easy ways for them to save money either outside of just restructuring more deals. They can't just cut Derek Carr and make a ton of cap. I think this is an interesting idea for the Lions, and I wanted to just give it some attention. Don't need to do a full breakdown, but show some plays, give it some attention about why this could make sense and why maybe it doesn't make sense. It's only 27 years old, so when they signed his extension, this was really going into the prime of his career. So if this is the kind of deal Lions would make, again, you're probably giving up a little bit more trade compensation. So I would think the Lions' outlook would be like, hey, this is a guy that we like. We can stick him here with Aiden Hutchinson for multiple seasons. Draft pick is now worth it because it's not like he has a contract price depending on how the deal would go down, that's incredibly expensive, where it's like the Max Crosby or Trey Hendrickson, where they're making like $30 million, and like, oh, that's a lot with Lee McNeil and Aiden Hutchinson about to get paid. Instead, according to Over the Cap, and again, I think the contracts may play out differently. Part of the value here for the New Orleans Saints could be like, hey, you take on more of that money, and you don't have to give us as much, because if you look at it, the Lions don't even have a third-round pick in this upcoming year's draft, so I can definitely see the Lions say, we'll take on a little bit more money, we'll save you there a little bit, you are going to get a little bit less in return in terms of trade value, because this is a guy that we know you just signed, so you like the player, but you need to open up some cap space. So a desperate team would be the New Orleans Saints in the spot, especially if they're looking to restart and they move off their coaching staff, which is very much so on the table. The ownership could have a say in this. $1.1 million he would cost towards the cap this year, according to Over the Cap, via a trade, which that's nothing for the Lions this season. Just over about $7.5 million next season is not super expensive either, especially for the production that you're getting out of this player. That's very reasonable. I mean, you consider what we gave to a guy like Marcus Davenport. That's a very reasonable deal, $7.7 million. And then beyond that, it'd be at $12.75 and $12.75 for the last 2 years. However, no guaranteed money and a $10.75 million in base salary for those 2 seasons. So there's flexibility to work around with this contract. And, you know, maybe there's even an out within there if you made this kind of move, where it's like he doesn't have to be here for 4 years, but kind of like the Zadarius Smith idea. And the reason I liked it is because, like, well, hey, I get him for 2 seasons. With Aiden Hutchinson, you would then have this guy potentially for multiple years. And if you already like the player, which is very possible, Lions like the player, they've seen the production, they know he's reliable. Now, instead of like, hey, if Marcus Davenport would have hit and he was healthy and he could have earned an extension, it's kind of like just skipping that whole process and just feeling like, well, this guy we believe has kind of already earned that kind of deal because it's not that expensive of a contract, and we like him opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. So we can kind of bypass the idea of he has to prove himself, even though he'd still have to prove himself, and we just have the compliment to Aiden Hutchinson, a guy that physically 6'5", 260 pounds, as I said, only 27 years old. He's built well to play opposite of Hutchinson. Definitely brings a little bit of that power rushing aspect to the table for future years, but for the Lions now, he actually surprised me a little bit. I always picture Carl Granderson as like this just mauling defensive end, but he definitely brings a lot more twitch, a lot more suddenness and urgency to his game, as well as the length and 34-inch arms that the Lions love. You look at it production-wise, this season alone, 30 pressures, that's 12th in football. Before this last week, he had over 17% pass rush win rate. Also was accounted for 20 stops, according to Pro Football Focus. That's second in the NFL, and 4 sacks this season, which would have been tied for 23rd so far in the NFL. I don't think this is the top pass rusher, and I don't even think every game he always looked like by far the best pass rusher onto this team, even though they don't really create a lot of pressure this season. But he's also well known for his run defense, which is a huge jump from coming out of Wyoming, where he wasn't as much so known for that aspect that he's become known for in the NFL. Watching some of Carl Granderson, just some of my kind of early takeaways that if this went down, that we could kind of have a sense of what the player we would probably be getting here. Early takeaways, first off, would be the effort that he plays with, the pursuit, the energy. I talked about the suddenness and the twitch. We'll get to that in a second, but it is the energy that he brings to the table. He comes with a lot of force at the point of attack as an edge setter. There's a lot of energy that he plays with. He also plays with really nice feel for the quarterback within the pocket. You get great pursuit out in space. He has the athleticism to play a stand-up edge rusher, drop into coverage, put his hand in the dirt, rush off the end. He's got the physical build and length specifically to play strong side and weak side defensive end. He's bounced around to both right defensive end and left defensive end. Though when saying that as a run defender, I don't think that he's necessarily just like a rock at the point of attack. Like, I do think that he's much more about the length and kind of the physicality that he can play with at the point of attack, and kind of the shock in his hands, the heavy hands that he plays with that he can have on the initial point of attack, rather than that ability in terms of like the leg drive to continuously walk offensive tackles back or sit himself down and not get moved off the point of attack. At times you kind of see it as like legs kind of give out a little bit, kind of loses footing trying to hold ground. So he's not necessarily that, but that's okay, because for the rest of the season, obviously you have guys like Levi and you have Josh Paschal who can kind of help within that role a little bit as well. But it was everything else that he brought to the table which kind of surprised me that I was not expecting. It's the body control as a pass rusher. We talk about a little bit of the slither. He's got an ability to get very slippery between the tackles. They use him a ton on stunts, which kind of leads to the pressures there. Not always finishing, but leads to the pressures. He's got an ability to find a quarterback really well. He's got body control at the top of his pass rush to string moves together, where it doesn't tie out and he can open up kind of a counter. His little counter spin move is very nice, fluid in terms of the footwork as well, which opens up so much stunt variety for him. Off the ball, he's got suddenness to his game. He's got good timing off the line of scrimmage, impactful, especially for like short setting offensive linemen. And now when I watched him, he felt a little bit hectic as a pass rusher. Definitely is a little bit more, to me, a little more clunky, a little more choppy as a pass rusher. There can look a little bit segmented rather than continuously fluid. He doesn't seem to be incredibly loose within the hips. He's also laterally not the most agile player, where you'll see like on the play side of like stretch runs where he'll actually turn and start to run. He plays with great discipline, great feel for that. Like, I got to contain, got to force his back inside. And he never really lacks the energy to like, hey, he's not playing hard. He always brings that to the table, and his length helps him a ton here. However, the downside is that he doesn't move incredibly well laterally, so you can kind of get him in some tough spots where you can't stay square to the line of scrimmage. Or even as a pass rusher, I think he does a great job at keeping distance and keeping space from offensive linemen, and he does play with some of that suddenness and really nice footwork to get inside wins. The downside to me is that he's a little bit stiff, it feels like, in the hips, so when working the arc or turning the corner, it's a little bit more choppy. As a pass rusher, it's not as fluid getting through those, and you can get him kind of stalled out early on reps. Just pop as he has at that initial point of attack. His initial hands can be a little bit inconsistent, and I don't always think the walk back is fantastic because it feels like he doesn't always create the best leverage in those spots that's able to continue through the rep. He does, however, carry some flexibility, and that's where the slizzer shows up. That's where the ability to maintain space as he's working in cross-facing offensive linemen, and also that ability to create dip and bend. Hands can just be a little bit inconsistent, especially as a run defender, which can also lead to inconsistencies getting off blocks, creating shed opportunities, and finishing all the time, though we do see 20 stops, which I think says a lot about the effort. It also says a lot about the contain and the discipline within his game, understanding the gap he has to get to, and kind of just the urgency that he plays with. He plays with great lockout length. Sometimes the shed can be a little bit slower than you'd like because it's not as smooth in terms of like stack and shed. You'll get him kind of caught up a little bit more at times, though his hands are very fast. They're very reactive. You'll see the quick swipes. You'll see variety within his pass rush moves. You'll see him try to kind of string together pass rush attempts, skips pass rush setups. You'll get some chops, you'll get rips, you'll get swim moves. He has a lot of variety within his arsenal as a pass rusher. I don't think he's just like a pure, I'm just going to bowl back the offensive tack over and over. That's not as much of his game as I thought it was. He has a real long arm ability. He carries way more flexibility than I thought, and he opens up a much deeper package as a pass rusher that's very effective as a stunt rusher. This is a very interesting option. Athletically, obviously, he didn't test out incredibly well when coming out for the draft out of Wyoming. 4.79 40, which is actually really solid. He's pretty good moving in a straight line. He's got some speed, and he's got some burst to him. He has some closing ability. A lot of that comes back to effort as well, and good angles. A 1.7, 110-yard split. It's not insane, and a 7.44 3-cone is just okay. Again, for a guy at his size, it's not terrible. That being said, the production's there. The reliability of being on the field is there. The connection is also there. I think it makes it an interesting option. I don't think this is the most likely trade if the Lions do make a trade, is like, hey, they're going to get this guy. But I don't think it should be taken off the table because it would make sense that something like this would take a little bit longer. Saints with their injuries, you're being patient. They need to open up future financial cap space, so this could be a way for them to do that. The flip side for the Lions would have to be, hey, we're not going to give you a lot. We're just not going to do it. So if you want to do it, if you want to help yourself out, if this is a restart, we have an offer out there, but we're not going to go incredibly high. I don't think the Lions would give up a second-round pick for this player. I'm not completely sold on that. Like, yes, do it. Second-round pick, give it to him. Knowing that you don't have a third-round pick, I think I'd be perfectly fine with giving up a fourth-round pick for this season because of his deal, and I'd have him going forward. I think you may have to throw more than that into it. Again, if the team like the Saints are the desperate team in this case, they definitely could be, because I think the Lions have options with Zadarius Smith. We just saw what Arden Key did, and I like Arden Key. The Lions do have options. Not a ton, but they have some real options out there. I think it's interesting. It's just that balance. The Lions' cost versus what they are willing to get back in return to open up cap space, and how urgent they are to open up cap space, knowing that they just don't have a ton of options, and this season is not looking great right now for New Orleans. So I think it makes a ton of sense, and if the Lions like this player, I'm not counting this out at all. I think it makes more sense in some ways than Cam Jordan, because Cam Jordan's would be a great veteran presence, but I don't think Cam Jordan brings the juice that is like, this is going to replace Hutchinson. I just don't think he brings enough from what I've seen to this point. He'll get you some flash wins. I just don't think the juice is there to make that kind of a big swing for this team. To me, this isn't the best pass rusher. I'm not saying this is Max Crosby, but he brings a lot more to the table as if he is your number one defensive end, right? He brings more to the table than what you would get, say, out of a Cam Jordan. He brings closer to, I think, what Zadarius Smith can bring to the table as well. A lot of fire and also a lot more suddenness, I feel like, in his game. It's a little bit hectic. It's a little bit unpolished, it feels like at times, but he plays high-energy football, and I just think he brings more to the table than a guy like Cam Jordan would. And I don't really think they're in play for a guy like Chase Young, who hasn't had a great season this year, but I could be wrong on that. So we'll see. I think it's an interesting idea. I don't think the Lions would go into a day one or maybe even a day two pick, maybe a future third, but I'd be pretty surprised on that. I think the Lions would have the price as, hey, we'll give you a day three, maybe a round 4, and maybe like a future 7. I could see the Lions, holding their ground on that. I wouldn't give up a day 2 pick for this player. Maybe a future third, maybe I could get there, but I'm definitely not sold on giving up a second-round pick. But anyways, I think it's an interesting idea. We'll see if it happens. Not saying it will, but I think it's just an interesting name. We haven't talked about him yet, so I thought I might as well. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.